This is known as a dark masterpiece anime. High-ranking officials, driven by a desire for the Elixir of Life, sent a group of death row inmates to a small island called Paradise. While the place looks like heaven, it is actually grotesque to the extreme. Only those who find the elixir will be granted a pardon. However, over 60 people previously sent there have gone missing. The ships that returned were covered in flowers. Upon closer inspection, people were horrified to find they were filled with human body parts. Subsequently, 5 investigation teams met the same fate. The sole survivor returned with his body covered in pustules. By the next morning, flowers bloomed from those pustules, turning him into a terrifying creature, neither human nor ghost. To prevent the inmates from escaping, the court assigned an executioner to each person, authorized to execute them on the spot if any ill intentions were detected. The protagonist, Gabimaru, is the most extraordinary among the death row inmates. He was previously sentenced to execution by drawing and quartering, a punishment that typically tears a person in two instantly. However, even after the bulls were exhausted, Gabimaru remained unharmed. Next was decapitation, but the sword shattered before he could even bleed. It was the same with burning at the stake and boiling in oil. Gabimaru remained perfectly safe even when the oil pot exploded. He comes from a place called the Stone Village, where the people seem just as bizarre. The village chief, in particular, can have his internal organs pierced and scattered, yet still recover instantly. From the moment they are born, they are forced to learn the art of killing. Gabimaru's parents were killed by the chief when he was still an infant. He had no dreams or ambitions, mindlessly following orders to kill. As the strongest ninja in the village, the chief married his daughter to him. Unlike anyone else, this woman was as innocent as a blank sheet of paper. Because of her, Gabimaru's entire world changed completely, and he gradually fell in love. To protect this love, Gabimaru decided to leave his life of violence behind, but how could the village chief let such a perfect killing tool simply walk away? And so, he personally disfigured his own daughter, intending to use this to break Gabimaru's spirit. However, far from loathing his wife, Gabimaru became even more tender and devoted to her. Seeing that his efforts were in vain, the village chief decided to get rid of him. He told Gabimaru that he could earn his freedom by completing one final mission. As it turned out, Gabimaru was betrayed by his comrades during the mission and captured, an act orchestrated by the chief himself. Although Gabimaru was capable of killing everyone, he knew that given the chief's godlike power, he would be hunted to the ends of the earth. Therefore, he chose to stop resisting and allowed himself to be imprisoned. Gabimaru thought that with his abilities, no one could touch him. However, to his surprise, the shogunate sent a professional executioner to take his life, Yamada Asaemon Sagiri. The Yamada Asaemon is a renowned clan of sword testers and executioners who have honed their craft over generations, each member possessing peerless swordsmanship. With just one glance at Sagiri, Gabimaru could already envision his own head being severed from his neck, causing him to unintentionally snap the wooden bowl in his hands. As Sagiri swung her blade, Gabimaru instinctively dodged. He wasn't a coward, he was simply terrified of what would happen to his wife if he died. In a village that treats women as nothing more than birthing machines, he couldn't bear to imagine the tragic fate that would await her. But just as he was about to strike back, Sagiri suddenly presented a shogunate pardon. With this document, neither the authorities nor the rock village could touch a hair on his head. The catch? He had to travel to a place known as Paradise and retrieve the Elixir of Life. It is a place that looks like paradise on the surface, but in reality, it is a hell crawling with monsters. In Sagiri's eyes, Gabimaru was undoubtedly the best candidate. If he could secure the elixir, he could rightfully live a happy life with his wife. Naturally, Gabimaru could not refuse. However, before they set out, Sagiri wished to see his true strength. In an instant, Gabimaru's entire body erupted into brilliant flames, and the soldiers standing in his way were incinerated to ash. Amazed by his power, Sagiri deemed him qualified. The next stop was Edo, where he joined the other candidates. Beneath the pavilion, the death row convicts knelt on the ground, all of them ruthless criminals who had taken countless lives. Similarly, only the one who successfully retrieved the elixir would receive a pardon. After witnessing the horrific state of the sole survivor of a previous expedition, several convicts grew terrified and declared they no longer wanted to go. Rather than dying such a gruesome death on that island, they claimed they would rather return to prison. No sooner had the words been spoken than the head of the giant guard rolled onto the ground. "If you don't want to go, then die now," the official declared. He continued to explain that once on the island, members of the Yamada Asaemon clan would accompany them as monitors. Any misconduct would result in immediate execution. Furthermore, if the assigned executioner died, whether by murder or accident, the convict would also be executed upon return. Finally, because the ships had limited capacity and there weren't enough executioners, they needed to reduce the number of convicts before departure. As the criminals whispered in confusion, a scarred man suddenly struck, slaughtering another convict. The officials on the platform said nothing, clearly approving of this method. Immediately, a massacre broke out. Despite having their hands tied, several convicts ignored the handicap, displaying extraordinary abilities that earned them the title of supernatural beings. For instance, the scarred youth who led a massive band of thieves in the deep mountains, the woman who single-handedly took out all the generals in Rikudo Castle, the long-haired middle-aged man known as the Dragon Sword and the peerless Grandmaster of Bezu, and the giant lying on the ground, 5 or 6 times the size of a normal human, who was said to be invulnerable to blades and had even swallowed a bear alive. Among them, the most noteworthy was Gabimaru. However, he showed absolutely no interest in the slaughter. He directly told the shogun on the platform that he disliked killing and asked if there was another way to screen the candidates. An official, enraged by his attempt to bargain, told the nearby convicts that anyone who could kill Gabimaru would be selected. Hearing such an easy condition, the mob rushed to attack. Seeing no way to avoid it, Gabimaru decided to counterattack. While repeating that he didn't want to kill, he moved forward, one man's neck was torn open, and another's throat was bitten through. The air filled with wretched screams and spraying blood. This brutal efficiency even made the high-ranking officials, who were well acquainted with death, feel uneasy. Eventually, the head samurai shouted for it to stop. Those still standing were officially chosen, 10 convicts in total. Each was paired with an executioner to journey to the secret island of the South Seas in search of the Elixir of Immortality. Upon arrival, a man noticed a butterfly landing on his hand, only to discover with horror that it had a human face. Moments later, he had to chop off his own hand after being stung. The severed limb rapidly transformed into a plant. Soon, a swarm of centipedes crawled toward them, creatures that not only possessed human faces but also had countless twitching fingers inside their mouths. This was a bizarre, twisted paradise. Those affected by the butterfly's pollen would not only become nutrients for the island but also be forced to fuse with other organisms, turning into indescribable monsters. Though they possessed the muscles and bones of normal creatures, they lacked internal organs and reproductive systems. Driven by the desire for the legendary elixir, the high officials had sent this group of death row convicts into a literal living nightmare. Previously, almost all those who participated in the investigation had perished. The sole survivor had turned into a mere potted plant, neither human nor ghost. What shocked everyone on the island was that even before a trace of the elixir could be found, a massacre had already begun. Convicts killed monitors killed convicts, and convicts killed each other. In this three-way free-for-all, order had completely collapsed on this side of the island. Upon arriving on the island, Sagiri was captivated by the ethereal scenery. However, Gabimaru sensed that something was wrong. The vegetation and the chaotic ecosystem felt disturbingly unnatural. Beneath this beautiful facade, unknown dangers were surely lurking. Just as he removed his shackles to prepare for action, Sagiri swung her blade at him, reminding him that according to regulations, a convict must remain bound until the mission is complete. This constant nagging left Gabimaru somewhat speechless, but he was currently too indifferent to start a conflict with her. While Sagiri was refastening the shackles on Gabimaru, a massive hammer suddenly struck. Gabimaru took a direct hit to the head and was sent flying. The attacker was Hoko, one of the death row convicts. It was said that during his time as a warrior monk, he became obsessed with weaponry. To acquire powerful arms, he had slaughtered no fewer than 1,000 dancers and master swordsmen. But Gabimaru was no pushover. The sneak attack had caused him no actual physical damage. Seeing this, the monk's battle lust surged, believing only an opponent this strong could allow him to unleash his treasures and slaughter to his heart's content. Unlike Sagiri, Kiso, the executioner accompanying the monk, did not force him to wear shackles, nor did he intervene in the fight. He was only there to monitor. He couldn't care less if the convicts killed each other. Seeing Kiso's indifference, Sagiri also stepped back, though not before once again insisting that Gabimaru put his shackles back on. Meanwhile, the attacks were already closing in. The warrior monk seized the opportunity to strike relentlessly, but Gabimaru refused to dodge until his shackles were finally secured. Once they were fastened, Gabimaru delivered a powerful hook kick that sent his opponent soaring into the air, scattering his countless weapons. Moving with explosive speed, Gabimaru spun his body and kicked the butt of a spear, launching it like a cannonball. The devastating impact sent the monk flying through the dust and debris. The monk slowly crawled back up, revealing that he had sewn his armor directly into his skin, which was why the spear had failed to pierce him. It seemed as though the battle would continue. But a moment later, he collapsed and died a gruesome death on the spot. Growing impatient, Gabimaru urged, "Let's go find the elixir already." Kiso, meanwhile, drew his blade and decapitated the monk. Since his assigned convict was dead, the executioner's mission was officially over. Kiso had absolutely no intention of involving himself further in this murky business. On the surface, the objective of this expedition is to retrieve the Elixir of Life, but for the Yamada Asaemon clan, it is actually a ruthless competition for the position of the next clan head. Trust is non-existent among them, and the formidable convicts are even more unpredictable. Kiso had witnessed firsthand how any semblance of order had collapsed from the moment they stepped onto the island. The convict Roarota flew into a frenzy and crushed his assigned executioner with a single blow. Another convict, Aya, conspired with a different executioner to eliminate their respective partners. Meanwhile, the convict Kun attempted to use a honey trap to seduce her executioner, only to be instantly decapitated on the spot. Between those looking to thin out the competition and those plotting or feigning to join forces, Kiso realized that if things continued this way, even he would eventually be unable to escape. Before departing, he revealed a secret to Gabimaru. The shogunate has already been in contact with the Iwagakure, and the next wave of people sent to the island will be from there. After Kiso departed, Gabimaru suddenly attacked Sagiri. He realized that if the hidden stone ninjas reached the island first, everything would go up in smoke. He had to find the elixir first. Although he held no grudge against the woman before him, she was an obstacle. Blades clashed, sending sparks flying. However, while his strikes appeared fierce, they lacked any true killing intent. The love his wife gave him had begun to melt his frozen heart. He found himself unable to kill someone of good nature. Gabimaru struggled between the murderous laws of his village and his own emerging humanity. Eventually, he shattered Sagiri's blade. Sensing his overwhelming bloodlust, she closed her eyes and waited for death. Yet, the death she imagined never came. Gabimaru stood trembling, his blade halted. He realized he could no longer kill indiscriminately. He wondered if such weakness would prevent him from surviving or ever seeing his wife again. Looking at the man before her, Sagiri suddenly remembered that every time he committed a slaughter, he seemed to wear the same expression of agony. In that moment, she understood Gabimaru's true nature. Seeing him face his true feelings, Sagiri wanted to see if a man like him could truly find redemption. Therefore, she did not pursue the conflict further. Just as their tension was resolved, the true dangers of the island arrived. Countless centipedes swarmed from all directions. A bizarre, fish-headed monster with 6 arms appeared, holding prayer beads and folding its hands in prayer. The eerie sight made Sagiri instinctively recoil. The fish-headed monster opened its eyes and attacked with all 6 arms. Gabimaru leaned back to dodge before crushing its head with a kick. The creature retaliated, slamming Gabimaru into the ground and binding him with 2 tails before tossing him aside. Gabimaru tried to escape, but he was surrounded. He erupted in flames, incinerating the monster's heads and slaughtering them like an Asura. His brutal methods wiped out one life after another, leaving the ground covered in blood and severed limbs. At that moment, Sagiri could hardly distinguish who the real monster was. Suddenly, a long-armed Buddha-like creature attacked her. Gabimaru immediately severed its arm to save her. In a flash of swordlight, the fish-headed monster attempting a sneak attack was killed on the spot. The man who struck was Yamada Asaemon Genji, accompanied by the female ninja Yuzuriha and another monitor named Senta. Looking at the corpses scattered across the ground, Yuzuriha recognized Gabimaru's immense strength. She hugged him, proposing they form a team. However, Gabimaru completely dismissed her. As a competitor, he knew she surely had hidden motives. At that moment, Sagiri asked why there were 2 Yamada Asaemon executioners accompanying her. Genji explained that the criminal he was originally monitoring, Asachobe, had been deceived by this woman and met a tragic end. He believed Yuzuriha was so devious and dangerous that one monitor was absolutely not enough to keep her in check. To offer a benefit for cooperation, Yuzuriha shared that the greatest danger on this island was not the monsters they had just killed, but the insects. The pollen from the human-faced butterflies is hallucinogenic and poisonous. Anyone stung or infected by it would immediately transform into a plant. Gabimaru was curious as to how she knew this. Having realized that Asachobe had been left for dead after his value was exhausted, Gabimaru understood that while this woman appeared innocent, she was as cold-blooded as a viper. Senta noted that the artifacts found on the monsters seemed to originate from Taoism and Buddhism, though they did not yet understand what these symbols truly represented. Thus, they needed to continue gathering information. Elsewhere, the executioner Toma, who had conspired with the convict Asachobe to kill each other's partners, also encountered monsters. It turned out the 2 were actually brothers. To save Chobe, Toma had infiltrated the Yamada dojo. Relying on his terrifying natural talent, he obtained the status of a sword tester within a single month and subsequently became a monitor to help his brother navigate the dangers of the island. As Chobe began his slaughter, Toma observed that his brother's strength lay not just in raw power, but in his ability to adapt to any situation. Whether it was when their mother died of illness, when their father was executed for seeking revenge for his lord, or when they were attacked by bandits, Chobe would always quickly grasp the situation and dominate the outcome. Even in the face of certain death, he could find a way to survive. To Toma, his brother was a true king, and he was prepared to devote his entire life to him. As a monster was sliced in half, a Buddha's staff suddenly struck Asa in the face. A Buddha-faced monster had launched a sneak attack. Fear began to surge within Toma, who wondered if these creatures were actual deities punishing sinners. On the contrary, Asa was entirely unaffected, the seeds of rage flourishing within his heart. Amidst his turbulent memories, Asa made a decision. He would slaughter every monster and convict that stood in his way, find the elixir, and consume it with his brother. Meanwhile, another threat appeared, a man who allegedly weighed 200 kilograms at birth and possessed such infinite strength that he could crush stone statues at will. Driven by hunger, he had even consumed his own parents. He loved playing crushing games, and by the age of 3, he had killed his entire village. Currently, while his body had become increasingly monstrous, his IQ remained that of an infant. His bone-chilling cries were loud enough to burst a person's eardrums. This man was Roarota. The rank 1 executioner of the Yamada clan had already been reduced to mincemeat by a single slap from him. Just moments ago, another executioner named Renji was killed instantly while trying to save Sagiri. Even though Rokurota's palm only grazed him, the force was enough to impale his body and send him flying hundreds of meters. Seeing that Roarota was about to strike again, Gabimaru launched a kick that sent the giant tumbling, knocking down several large trees. However, the attack dealt no damage at all. Roarota uprooted a massive tree nearby and hurled it forward. Gabimaru narrowly escaped death by dodging it. Looking at the giant hand reaching for him, Gabimaru realized he could not engage in a direct physical confrontation. Physically, the giant was a freak of nature. A single touch meant certain death. He had to rely on long-range attacks. Gabimaru immediately targeted Roarota with dozens of ninjutsu techniques. However, whether it was lightning that could pierce trees or blades as sharp as steel, nothing could break through the opponent's defense. He realized he needed someone to create an opening so he could get close enough to use a fire-based technique. Meanwhile, Yuzuriha, who had promised to cooperate, was simply sitting in a tree watching the drama, completely indifferent to the battle. Suddenly, a flash of a blade severed Rokurota's fingers. The one who stepped in was Sagiri. Although her rank among the sword testers was only 12th, the ranking in the Yamada house was not based solely on strength, but also on the proximity of one's right to inherit the headship. As a woman with insufficient combat experience, Sagiri had been marginalized, but that did not mean she was weak. In terms of executioner swordsmanship, her skill was terrifyingly precise. Gabimaru had to admit that when her purpose, mission, and heart were aligned, her hesitation vanished, and her swordsmanship could surpass anything. Rokurota's constitution was extraordinarily durable, but as long as a strike was perfectly aimed at the gaps in his physical structure, a blade could still kill him. However, because the opponent moved constantly, Sagiri could not land a clean hit. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted from Rokurota's mouth. The sudden sound froze everyone in their tracks. Roarota swung a massive palm, slamming Gabimaru deep into the ground. Relying on the special physical conditioning of the hidden stone village, Gabimaru thought he had endured it, but he immediately began coughing up blood. Roarota followed up with a punch as heavy as a mountain, but fortunately, Sagiri parried the final blow. Once again, she swung her blade against the giant's body. As the massive figure fell, Sagiri prepared to behead him, but Roarota managed to dodge. Gasping for breath, she asked Gabimaru if there was a way to make the giant hold his head up. Gabimaru replied that he might have a way. He cast several fire-based techniques, but instead of targeting Roarota, he set the surrounding trees ablaze to create thick smoke. The smoke gathered at a high level, containing carbon monoxide to induce poisoning and unconsciousness. Due to the giant's height and his constant crying, he was bound to inhale a large amount. Eventually, Roarota could no longer bear it and sank to his knees. As he tried to attack again, Gabimaru pinned him down. Sagiri focused her spirit and struck with a single, unadorned blow. The strike was perfectly simple. As his life flashed before his eyes, Sagiri gently held Rokurota's head, as if comforting a newborn infant. The fire consumed the forest, and Renji remained there forever. As the group ran out of the woods, Yuzuriha and Senta stood dazed, staring at something nearby. When Gabimaru and Sagiri caught up, they too were frozen in place. It was a village. If this was truly paradise, did that mean immortals lived in this village? On the other side of the island, the executioner Tamiya was attempting to escape with the convict Nirugai. Among all the prisoners, this child was the least deserving of death. She was only there because she had been kind enough to lead a group of lost foreigners to her village. Consequently, her entire village was slaughtered simply because they lived in the mountains and refused to submit to the rule of the shogunate. Nirugai did not die because those scoundrels wanted to use her to find the locations of other villages. Witnessing her innocence in tragic circumstances, Tenza made a firm resolution: he would ensure she left the island alive. Just then, a massive shogunate ship appeared before them. They initially thought they could board it to return home, but as the mist cleared, the sight made Tenza's heart race with fear. These were the remains of ships that had tried to flee the island, with grotesque figures peeking out from them. As Tenza drew his blade to fight, giant tentacles surged from a distance. Fortunately, the two managed to dodge just in time, narrowly escaping certain death. As more tentacles appeared, they realized they had to find a functional ship to escape. Suddenly, two figures blocked their path. It was Kiso, who had attempted to leave early because his convict died, only to be turned into a monstrous, half-dead entity. Surrounded by tentacles rising from the sea, Nirugai chose to give up. Ever since she inadvertently caused the destruction of her village, she no longer wished to live. However, Tenza was stubborn and refused to understand her despair, fighting desperately to save the child. His pure-hearted impulsiveness moved Nirugai, and after a bloody struggle, they managed to flee, though they were forced back to the island. All the surrounding currents flowed inward. Without finding a way out, they would be trapped forever even if they found the elixir. As they washed the blood off their bodies, Tenza made a sudden discovery: the boy before him was actually a girl. Meanwhile, Aza and his brother continued their slaughter in search of the elixir. To survive, Chobei resorted to drinking the blood of the monsters. After replenishing his fluids, he instinctively sensed something ahead. Parting the grass, the two were astonished to find two beautiful women kissing in such a hellish place. Chobei launched an attack, slashing the eye of one of the figures, but before his blade could descend again, flowers bloomed from the socket and the eye regenerated instantly. It turned out these were the Tensens, the immortals of the island. These hermaphroditic beings had no gender and possessed boundless power, capable of shattering metal with their bare bodies. Furthermore, they were truly immortal. Even if sliced in half, they would recover in the blink of an eye. Their strength was beyond imagination. Any intruder on the island would be punished and thrown into a furnace to be refined. There, they would not die but would be reincarnated as beautiful flowers, achieving eternal happiness. These lives would then become the source of the Elixir of Life, turned into pills for the Tensens to consume. To kill Roarota, Gabimaru had set the surrounding forest ablaze, and the massive fire attracted numerous bizarre creatures. Since these monsters were the only clues to finding the elixir, the group followed their trail to investigate. Venturing deeper, they discovered a village. Suddenly, a little girl ran past Gabimaru. In a place filled with monsters, the appearance of a normal human was highly suspicious. As Gabimaru tried to grab her, a staff swung over his head. A humanoid creature made entirely of wood, a tree man stood before them. Gabimaru kicked the creature away and told Yuzuriha to handle it while he chased the girl. Yuzuriha took out a vial of medicine and drank it down. On the other side, Gabimaru quickly caught up with the girl. He thought dealing with her would be easy, but he was caught off guard. The girl possessed strange, immense strength, even delivering a punch that made him cough up blood. Gabimaru stopped holding back, using vines and roots to hang her from a tree. However, the girl immediately burst into tears. Seeing this, Sagiri released her and comforted her. Yuzuriha arrived shortly after, having already defeated the tree man. As the group discussed their next move, the tree man on the ground began to speak. Guided by the tree man, Gabimaru's group reached a ruined village. According to him, this place was not always like this 1,000 years ago. The group realized that this tree man had lived for an incredibly long time. Entering a house, they found it decorated with porcelain and calligraphy in a Taoist style. The tree man explained that the creatures Gabimaru called monsters were actually guardian beasts protecting the island. He was not one of them but a local inhabitant. He spoke of the legendary Tensens who commanded these beasts and confirmed that the elixir of life they sought was indeed located in Horai, deep within the mist at the island's center. He himself had received their blessing, but he warned that obtaining the elixir was impossible. All intruders would be punished by the Tensens and turned into fertilizer for the elixir. They were immortal beings that no one could truly defeat. Sensing danger, Tenza turned to flee, but before he could get far, an immortal appeared before him. With a simple palm strike, a massive explosion of force sent Tenza flying. Thanks to her small stature, Narugai managed to dodge the continuous attacks and rushed to Tenza's side to check his wounds. Seeing this, the immortal moved in to continue the assault. Suddenly, the fallen Tenza stood up and slashed the opponent's eye. For a moment, it seemed the sneak attack had succeeded, but the horrific wound healed instantly. With no time to think, Tenza told Narugai to run ahead, promising he would deal with the enemy quickly. As a rare genius of the Yamada Asaemon clan, Tenza's strength was by no means weak. With speed as swift as a flash of light, he sliced the immortal into hundreds of pieces. Unsure if the opponent could regenerate, the two quickly fled. After running for a distance, Tenza looked back and saw no one following. Just as he breathed a sigh of relief, the immortal suddenly appeared right in front of him. While he was at a loss, a sharp blade flew out and decapitated the immortal. The newcomer was Tenza's master, Shion, the fourth-ranked executioner of the Yamada clan. Though completely blind, his swordsmanship was supreme, and his true power surpassed all other executioners on the island. Previously, the convict paired with him, Kyun, had tried to seduce him with her seductive body, assuming no man could resist. However, Shion executed her on the spot. Having completed his task early, he had been searching for a way off the island. Through his acute sense of hearing, he determined that all the currents surrounding the island were loops. Attempting to sail straight out would lead to certain death. The only current leading to the outside world was filled with a murderous aura. Worried that his blindness might lead to an accident, Shion had turned back to find others who also intended to leave, accidentally saving Tenza in the process. To Tenza, Shion was not just a master but like a father. Having been a wandering street child, Tenza found that Shion provided him with not only a stable life but also deep affection. Influenced by Shion, Tenza developed an extremely kind nature, which was why he was determined to save Narugai despite her unfortunate circumstances. While they were talking, the immortal reappeared behind them. Shion immediately picked up Tenza and Narugai to flee, but as they crossed paths, his throat was slashed by the opponent's handblade. Had he not dodged in time, his head would have been severed. Seeing his master wounded, Tenza went berserk. He drew his sword and slashed wildly at the immortal. Facing this elusive monster, fleeing was futile. He decided to fight a desperate battle to the death. Shion tried to stop him, but as he cried out, blood sprayed from his wound like rain. Tenza lunged forward, determined to kill the pale-faced enemy. He utilized all his skills, his sword moving like the wind, but the immortal dodged effortlessly. The creature then closed in and flicked a finger, creating 4 black holes in Tenza's chest. Tenza coughed up a large amount of blood and knelt helplessly. He felt his fingertips growing cold while his wounds burned like fire. He realized he was dying. He feared everyone would be killed by this monster, but he refused to let that happen. He stood up once more, throwing a punch at the immortal's head. Even in death, he had to buy time for his master. However, the immortal was truly grotesque. Even with its head crushed, it could still launch an attack. Tenza's battered body was mortally wounded once again. Although Shion held Nurugai back from rushing in, he himself prepared to draw his sword for a final stand. With his throat soaked in blood, Tenza let out a groan, telling them to leave. Shion understood his intent. Suppressing his grief and reluctance, he turned and pulled Nurugai into the forest. He knew they could not defeat that monster now, staying meant they would all die. However, he swore he would avenge his disciple. The limbs of the woman-like immortal were shattered, and a large hole was bored into her head, yet she did not die. Instead, she let out a bizarre laugh. Bright red flowers began to grow from her mangled flesh, and soon her entire body was covered as a giant flower bloomed. 2 different bodies, one male and one female, emerged from it. This terrifying being was not just a monster, but a Tensen, the legendary immortals, or rather, the successful products of experiments created thousands of years ago. An unknown entity, seeking eternal life, had used the islanders as test subjects. Eventually, some became monsters, others turned into tree people, and only 7 successfully became Tensens. However, they still had limits to their lifespans. Just as the experiments showed progress, the islanders were depleted, until outsiders arrived once again to provide fresh material. Combining their previous results, the 7 Tensens and that mysterious entity soon researched a method to refine humans into elixir pills, achieving true immortality. Facing such an existence, it seemed only Gabimaru could stand on equal ground, as even he didn't realize that his training was actually rooted in the Tao of the Immortals. This was why blades shattered against him and fire could not kill him. To defeat the enemy, Gabimaru burned his very life force. Whether he could win this life and death struggle remained to be seen. Earlier, while searching for the elixir, Gabimaru had gone alone to Horai at the island's center. There, he saw countless tree people with their hands folded in prayer, their mouths continuously chanting. Despite this eerie sight, Gabimaru did not retreat. Continuing forward, he discovered a giant gate. Just as he was about to push it open, a figure appeared behind him. Gabimaru spun around and froze. He could tell at a glance that the being before him was not human. Gabimaru turned his head sharply and froze in his tracks. At a single glance, he could tell that the creature before him was not human at all. The woman was a legendary Tensen. With a long sigh, a fierce battle erupted as both sides charged simultaneously. After the first exchange, the Tensen's wrist snapped, followed immediately by a kick from Gabimaru that sent the Tensen's head spinning a dozen times. However, it restored itself instantly. As a heavy punch came crashing down, Gabimaru leaped backward to evade. He was stunned by a level of regenerative power and physical strength that defied logic. Gabimaru launched another kick at the head as a searing burst of flames exploded. He thought the blow had finished his opponent, but the charred corpse suddenly lunged forward and delivered a powerful punch. Gabimaru was sent flying, and a subsequent massive surge of force slammed him into the wall once again. However, what shocked the Tensen was that the human before them was still alive. Such incredible vitality was something no ordinary human could ever possess. The battle rages on as Gabimaru unleashes his full power. Although he repeatedly destroys the Tensen's body, its abnormal regenerative abilities allow it to recover instantly. Eventually, Gabimaru finds himself the only one wounded. Physical strikes and fire ninjutsu prove ineffective. Just as he feels he has run out of options, one of his attacks suddenly feels different and manages to inflict severe damage. As he analyzes why it worked, the male Tensen transforms into a woman. Invisible forces violently collide within Gabimaru's body, attacks he can neither defend against nor dodge. Amidst this life or death despair, his power surges once more. Driven by the singular desire to return to his wife, he refuses to stop regardless of the obstacles. He determines that if the enemy can regenerate, he must destroy it at a speed that exceeds its recovery. Under this frenzied assault, the immortal Tensen is finally struck down. Exhausted, Gabimaru demands the location of the elixir. In response, he hears only a bizarre laugh as the Tensen transforms into an utterly grotesque flower-like monster. Trying to stay calm and analyze the enemy's weakness, Gabimaru is caught in a surge of lightning that nearly knocks him unconscious. He dodges a whip-like strike and attempts to counter with a kick, but he is blocked and slammed into the ground. As he tries to ignite his flames again, a sharp pain racks his body. His previous battles have completely drained his stamina, leaving him unable to use ninjutsu. Lashed by countless vines and losing consciousness, the image of his wife flashes through his mind, and he fears he might never return. Bound in midair and crushed by giant vines, Gabimaru uses a hand blade to cut himself free. His ninja instincts take over. Even while drifting into unconsciousness, he reflexively chooses a suicidal explosion of fire. At that critical moment, the young girl, Mei, suddenly appears. With a sharp cry and a burst of overwhelming power, she carries Gabimaru away to safety. The Tensen glares at the retreating pair, growling as its body disintegrates and its petals fall. Meanwhile, in the center of Horai, the other Tensens are debating whether to manifest as male or female. The purple-haired Tensen interrupts their conversation, demanding the routine reports. While most intruders have been eliminated by guardian beasts, Jujin was not only unable to stop the humans found on the coast but also struggled in a difficult battle last night, eventually being forced to use his Kishikai form. The blonde Tensen grows angry and crushes Jujin's head in frustration. Another Tensen warns them not to underestimate the current intruders. Not only have the beasts been slaughtered, but even the gatekeepers have been defeated. These humans are different from those who came before. Just then, Asachobe, who had been thrown into a pit, crawls back out. He asks Jujin if the man who forced him into his monster form is dead. The Tensen acknowledges it and drinks the tan elixir from a cup. Regardless of who arrives, their goal remains the same: eternity. As the liquid is consumed, Jujin's aging body is once again filled with vitality. In the foggy lands, Gabimaru slowly regains consciousness as two figures appear behind him. These strange beings are called doshi. They possess transformation abilities similar to the Tensens, as well as bizarre powers and the ability to regenerate from wounds. Thousands of years ago, a mysterious entity seeking eternal life used the islanders as test subjects, eventually creating 5 different types of beings. 3 of these were failures. Although they possess long lifespans, they are limited to about 1,000 years, after which they turn into statues and lose consciousness. These include the beasts, irrational monsters formed from humans and animals, who are forbidden from entering Horai. There are also the gatekeepers, who possess immense strength but are considered a lower class of Tensen. The perfect beings are the Tensens, who are not only immortal but possess terrifying power. Between success and failure lie the doshi. They possess self-awareness and, more importantly, can cultivate their power just like the Tensens. This is the source of the strength Gabimaru had never previously understood. This power is called Tao, and it exists in all things. Truly powerful humans have actually managed to reach its threshold. There are 5 hidden methods to enhance one's Tao: meditation, breathing techniques, and most importantly, sexual alchemy, the union of yin and yang. The more these 2 poles circulate, the more one's Tao grows. Tao strengthened this way possesses the power to alter the balance of forces. The ones who have reached the pinnacle of this art are the Tensens. Because they are hermaphroditic, they can perform this yin-yang circulation within themselves. 1,000 years of continuous cultivation has granted them unparalleled power. Just moments ago, Yamada Asaemon Fuchi and the convict Gantetsusai encountered Gabimaru in May. Gantetsusai is incredibly strong, having previously slain one of the gatekeepers mentioned by the Tensens. Gabimaru realizes that a direct confrontation with Gantetsusai might result in both of them dying. Therefore, in order to defeat the Tensens and obtain the Elixir of Life, he decides to use his current knowledge as a bargaining chip and proposes an alliance with them. At that moment, Mei, who had been unconscious, sat up. Gabimaru noticed something was wrong. She had clearly been a small child before, but now she appeared to have grown older. Seeing that Mei could speak, Gabimaru immediately rushed over and asked if there was a way to resist the Tensens. The mysterious power she had used to save him earlier was clearly beyond that of a normal human. Mei pondered for a moment and spoke of the existence of Tao, but she could not clearly express how to obtain this power. The group was left confused, so Gabimaru and Gantetsusai decided to learn through the guidance of combat. Like Gantetsusai, Gabimaru realized that if he remained too strong and rigid, he would be unable to perceive that subtle energy. Suddenly, a figure attacked Gantetsusai. Although he blocked the strike with his blade, Mei was snatched from his shoulder. The mysterious figure was a doshi, who knelt respectfully before Mei. He not only called her lord but also pleaded for her to return to Horai. It turned out that Mei was in existence equal in status to the Tensens. As previously mentioned regarding the circulation of yin and yang, a partner is required. While the doshi are male, Mei is female and possesses the highest form of yin energy. They needed her as a perfect cauldron for cultivation. Although Mei shared the same origin as the Tensens, she was considered an inferior type because she only possessed yin energy. Consequently, she had been exiled by the strongest among the Tensens and given 2 choices: die by the roadside or serve as a cultivation vessel for the doshi to start over. Rage surged within Gabimaru. He finally understood why Mei always wore an expression of fear. Seeing a mere human dare to block his path, the doshi decided to execute them as an example. Suddenly, countless centipedes and human-faced butterflies swarmed the area. The doshi had gained control over the 2 most common creatures on the island. However, Gantetsusai and Gabimaru were not easily overwhelmed, and this human wave tactic was ineffective against them. Seeing this, the doshi used a demon realm technique to fuse all the surrounding insects into his own body. Gantetsusai struck with his blade, but the butterflies dispersed and swarmed him again. Though he dodged, the air was filled with pollen that affected him. Gabimaru used a fire-enhanced kick, shattering the monster's arm. He realized that while his strikes were not yet as powerful as a Tensen's, he had to be careful. Gantetsusai warned him to stay alert, reminding him that if he hadn't cut off his own hand earlier after being stung, he would have turned into a plant. Gabimaru realized that without clearly sensing Tao, the upcoming battle would be impossible to win. At that moment, Mei approached and took Gabimaru's hand, allowing him to directly touch her Tao. After a very brief moment of enlightenment, Gabimaru stepped forward. He understood now. It seemed his training in the Hidden Stone Village had already taught him similar techniques, which was why it appeared so simple. In this instant, Gabimaru could sense the chi of everything around him. He dodged all of the doshi's attacks effortlessly. When a powerful, heavy punch came his way, Gabimaru deflected it with a light touch, causing the monster's entire arm to explode. The doshi inside was incredulous, as the technique Gabimaru used was identical to that of a Tensen. Gabimaru delivered 2 consecutive kicks, knocking both doshi out of the air. However, they refused to yield and attacked again. Gabimaru nimbly used Gantetsusai's head as a stepping stone to lunge toward the centipede swarm, then launched a volley of fireballs at the butterfly doshi. Gantetsusai seized the opportunity to slice a doshi in half, sending blood spraying everywhere. Elsewhere, Aza, who had been beaten to near death by a Tensen and thrown into a pit, managed to crawl out from the wall of corpses with his brother Toma. Shortly after, a doshi appeared, sent by the Tensens to see if the prisoners had transformed into elixir. Without a word, Aza attacked. His strength was terrifying, even tearing off the opponent's arm, but because he did not know how to use Tao, his strikes dealt no substantial damage. Furthermore, heavily wounded from his previous battle, Aza quickly fell into a disadvantage. The doshi grabbed his shoulder and crushed his throat. Aza's throat with one hand, causing him to collapse in a pool of blood. However, to everyone's surprise, Aza, who should have been dead, suddenly sprang up and crushed the doshi's face with his hand. As his throat regenerated, markings appeared around the wound that were identical to Mei's. The doshi suspected that while at the bottom of the pit, those plants had fused with Aza's body. In the battle that followed, Aza's body became increasingly bizarre, his twisted and broken arms healed in the blink of an eye. Not only that, he grew stronger the more he fought, and the Tao within his body continued to expand. Terrified, the doshi attempted to summon the god beasts. But Toma had already slaughtered them all. Seeing Aza steadily approaching, the doshi prepared to launch another attack, but his arm was instantly crushed by a kick. During the fight, Aza discovered that when he cut his opponent, the body would begin to regenerate from the lower half. He deduced that the weakness of these monsters might be located near the ovule or the navel, and his guess proved correct. Aza grabbed the half-dead doshi and demanded to know the Tensen's location, seeking revenge. Meanwhile, led by the Hoko, Sagiri, and the others finally reached Horai, the centralmost part of the island. There, they encountered one of the 7 Tensen, Muten, who decapitated a tree person on the spot with just a flick of his finger. Yuzuri has sensed that something was wrong and immediately turned to flee, but she was caught in an instant. A massive force rendered her unable to move. From the Tensen's mouth, she learned that the so-called Elixir of Life was merely a ruse to lure outsiders to the island. In reality, it did not exist. The entire island was a giant laboratory, and the humans who arrived were nothing more than research materials. The elixir being refined was only intended for the Tensens. Normal humans would undergo horrific mutations if they consumed it. This Tensen had a twisted hobby, transforming intruders into the living dead. Just as he was about to strike, Yuzuriha vanished in a blink, and the Tensen was sliced into 100 pieces. However, before they could sigh in relief, the supposedly dead Tensen regenerated completely. He summoned his puppets to self-destruct. Fortunately, Yuzuriha dodged in time. The Tensen realized that while these humans had grasped the basics of Tao, they were far too weak to be a threat. Still, he thought capturing this ninja to use as a cauldron for refinement would be a fine idea. As for the others, they were now expendable. A lightning-fast punch sent Sagiri flying dozens of meters, coughing up blood. Senta seized the opportunity to strike, severing both of the Tensen's arms. On the other side, Yuzuri had drank a vial of poison, causing her body to secrete a viscous mucus. She could metabolize the poison and release it through her hands as sticky threads containing various toxins to bind the Tensen. Despite his upper body being mangled, the Tensen would not die. Countless branches and vines erupted from his shattered form. A fierce battle broke out amidst the flash of blades. The Tensen dodged continuously until he found an opening to grab Yuzuriha's ankle and hurl her forward. He was quite fond of her, though she was weak now. He believed that with some training, she would make an excellent cauldron. During the exchange, Sagiri struck with her blade, but the Tensen leaned aside to dodge. He ignored her, thinking she was even less of a threat than the ninja. Suddenly, Sagiri threw her weapon. To his surprise, the blade pierced the Tensen's abdomen. The treeman's head on the ground shouted, "Aim for the dantian." The source of a Tensen's power. If it were destroyed, he could be killed. The blade tore through, and blood sprayed. Just as they thought they had succeeded, the wound in his abdomen healed again. The Tao contained in Sagiri's attack was simply too meager to truly harm him. Sagiri took a deep breath, and suddenly, a massive surge of power erupted from her body. She swung her sword again. creating an intense sense of dread. Although the Tensen retreated quickly, his head was still slashed. For a moment, he felt the threat of death. This time, the wound did not regenerate. Through their brief clash, Sagiri realized the Tensen possessed the same aura as Gabimaru and Roarota. Knowing this, she understood exactly how she needed to strike. On the other side, having nearly stepped through death's door, the Tensen felt no anger or fear. Instead, he grew even more exhilarated. Yuzuriha moved quickly to restrain him. Sagiri swung her sword down but was knocked back by an invisible force. The Tensen roared, commanding the living dead to kill the female ninja. Senta arrived just in time to slay the creature. Unable to break free, the Tensen directly bit off his own palm. Sagiri attacked again, but a single person's assault was clearly not enough to overcome him. Suddenly, a whip-like strike landed. Yuzuriha and Senta had joined the fray. Under their combined assault, all of the Tensen's limbs were severed. Yet, it was still futile. The Tensen's mangled body floated into the air. He performed a hand seal and transformed from male to female. Under an invisible attack, Senta was the first to fall. Seeing this, Yuzuriha risked everything. She drank more poison and threw out mucus threads to bind the Tensen's ankles. The Tensen launched a barrage of attacks at her, but she did not dodge. Even as the strikes rained down, she refused to let go, violently pulling the Tensen down from the air. As the Tensen rose to kill her, a sharp blade pierced through his chest from behind. It was Senta. He held the Tensen tightly and told Sagiri to strike. Sagiri lunged forward, her sword aimed straight at the Tensen's dantian. With combined speed and power, she shattered it. The Tensen coughed up blood, his eyes wide in disbelief as his life force vanished. Their desperate gamble had finally secured a victory. However, just as they let their guard down, Yuzuriha noticed that more flowers were blooming on the Tensen's corpse than before. As she grew suspicious, a burst of light struck. Memories flooded Senta's mind. He hated the Yamada house and the work of killing, yet he had been unable to resist. That was until he met a certain girl whose carefree nature blew away his stagnant life. He admired her freedom and silently fell in love with her. After being hit by the attack, flowers began to bloom across Senta's face, yet he remained happy with his choice. Behind them, a giant flower bud bloomed. While Sagiri stood in a daze, a massive hermaphroditic entity, 10 meters tall and colored in black and white, was born. Sagiri looked on in despair, tears welling in her eyes. How could they possibly continue fighting such a monster? The Tensen's massive form began firing vines and flowers at them. In their moment of despair, Shion appeared and sliced through everything. Yamada Asaemon Shion was the only executioner who had yet to show his true strength. Though blind, Narugai had claimed his power was unervingly absolute. Through the previous battle between Tenza and the Tensen, combined with his own later insights and training, Shion had now fully mastered the use of Tao. This was the only power capable of killing a Tensen. Swordlight flashed through the air, shattering the encroaching branches. Shion lunged forward with explosive force. The Tensen swung its arms, raining down countless orbs of light upon him. Stone statues shattered and thick smoke billowed into the air. Suddenly, a sharp blade pierced the Tensen's abdomen. Immediately after, Shion sent him flying with a kick. Sagiri and Yuzuriha watched in disbelief, amazed by the man's overwhelming power. However, at that moment, the Tensen let out a bizarre laugh. Countless flowers began to sprout from Shion's body. Despite the minor scratches sustained in the previous battle, the mutation was already taking hold. The Tensen could not wait to refine him into high-quality elixir. Shion acted decisively, cutting away the flowers growing from his own flesh, though this caused him to bleed profusely. Knowing he had to end this quickly, he lunged at the Tensen once more. On the other side, Sagiri and Narugai also joined the fray. Sagiri informed Shion that the Tanden is the source of a Tensen's power, and destroying it is the only way to kill them. However, she noted that the Tensen's current form likely possesses two Tandens, both of which must be destroyed simultaneously. To protect themselves from vine scratches that could cause flowerification, Sagiri and Narugai used slime secreted from Yuzuriha's body and covered themselves with bandages. Their plan was for the two of them to launch a frontal assault while Shion looked for an opening to destroy both Tandens at once. As soon as she finished speaking, the attack commenced. Narugai dodged the initial vine strike, then leaped into the air and sliced through it with a single stroke. Suddenly, the Tensen moved instantaneously, lunging downward with sharp claws. Fortunately, Sagiri managed to parry the blow. By utilizing her Tao, she was able to easily sever the regenerating vines of flesh. Seeing this, Shion began to act according to the plan. The Tensen condensed golden orbs of light and fired them at the group, but Shion dodged them all through his sensory perception. He then charged forward. As he moved, a surge of greater power erupted. With another swing of his sword, the Tensen's leg was completely severed, causing its body to collapse. Although the leg continued to regenerate, it could no longer keep up with the speed of the destruction. However, by this point, everyone's bodies had nearly reached their limits. The Tensen slowly rose, letting out a maniacal laugh as golden light erupted in all directions in a frenzied burst. While Narugai stood dazed, Sagiri stepped in just in time to save her. Taking advantage of the Tensen focusing its full attention forward, Shion swiftly approached from behind. White Tao flowed from his entire body toward the blade, continuously refining and swirling around it. Shion raised his sword high. This strike carried all of his rage and his unwavering determination to destroy the monster before him. However, just as the fatal blow was about to descend, Shion suddenly stopped. Something felt wrong. Was the Tanden truly the weakness? Why couldn't he sense any flow of Tao within it? As time slipped away, Shion grew increasingly anxious. At that moment, a dying Senta forced himself up and called out to him. The Tanden of a plant is its ovule. It is where the flower concentrates its nutrients. The center of those petals is the true weakness. Hearing this, Shion no longer hesitated and delivered a powerful strike. As the ovule was sliced open, countless Tensen heads, male and female, young and old, emerged from within. Shion did not let down his guard, preparing for a follow-up attack. To his surprise, petals began to fill the sky as countless peonies bloomed. It was as if the Tensen had finally returned its life essence to the earth. The battle was finally won. But they paid a staggering price. Both Senta and Shion were critically wounded and on the verge of death. Although Yuzuriha had a healing ointment, there was only enough for one person. Between pain that can be endured and pain that is beyond saving, the choice for these two was clear. Senta was like a candle flickering in the wind. In his final moments, he hallucinated an unreachable, beautiful dream. Amidst the breathtaking scenery, held in the arms of the woman he loved, he closed his eyes forever. Afterward, the group continued deeper into Horai. Here, elements of various religions and unknown creatures merged into bizarre statues scattered everywhere. They eventually found a temporary shelter to hide and recover. Shion began to organize all the information they had gathered. First was Tao, a power inherent in everyone. Mastering it grants superhuman strength, but because Tao is life essence itself, overusing it is extremely dangerous. Furthermore, the Tensen had claimed that the Elixir of Life does not exist. This meant the convicts could never fulfill the mission assigned by the shogunate. However, Sagiri recalled Gabimaru insisting that the elixir was real, claiming his village chief possessed an immortal body. Yuzuriha sensed something was amiss. She suspected this might all be an illusion, a form of brainwashing where young ninjas are shown supernatural phenomena to ensure their absolute submission. Gabimaru came here solely to reunite with his wife, but to Yuzuriha, this made no sense. Why would superiors allow their ninjas who are meant to be mere pawns to have emotional attachments that could hinder them? Does Gabimaru's wife truly exist? What is her name? There seemed to be no official records of her in the shogunate's files. Perhaps she, too, was nothing more than an illusion created by the village chief. On the other side, Gabimaru overexerted his Tao in a rush to master it, causing him to collapse. When he regained consciousness, he had lost his memory. Once again, he reverted to that cold-blooded killing machine. Facing the people before him, his only thought was to play along to gather information, and if they showed any opening, he would slaughter them all. At that moment, a high-ranking official arrived and read an imperial decree, ordering a new batch of Yamada Asaemon executioners to land on Shinsenkyo to supervise those already on the island. This concludes the entire story of Hell's Paradise Season 1. Let's look forward to Season 2, which is set to premiere this January. If you enjoyed this video, please give the channel a like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to catch our latest videos as soon as possible.